Pastor Norm and I had a conversation about marriage recently. I suppose we talk about marriage fairly regularly, especially since so many of the people in our church are married, and he's a counselor who works with people struggling with marriage. But this particular conversation was interesting and better than the normal ones we have, where we talk about how blessed Charisse and Lorraine are. I don't know why you're laughing. Yeah. So we had a conversation where we were talking about this counselor who does marriage therapy, but also talks on marriage. He's a big person in marriage and family therapy, and he says that he can come into a room meeting a couple for the first time, and within the matter of minutes can determine whether or not that relationship is going to end in divorce. Isn't that crazy? Now, for those of you who are married, you may want to lean in right now. What is this wild predictor that he thinks he can figure out that leads to divorce some 80-90% of the time? It's this: when one or the other in the marriage believes that they are carrying more than their fair share of the weight. If one person believes they're doing most of the work, doesn't matter if it's true or not, that is a predictor, that is a sirens. It's time to address the marriage if it gets to that place. But marriage is difficult because it's a covenantal life. It is bound together by what we call love, but it is also so much more. It is a series of sharing and giving and imagining and losing and taking. So much of marriage is so very, very difficult, and all of it is bound together by love. If love doesn't give, then at a certain point, marriage finds itself in trouble. And this is not surprising, the words that we make one another say whenever it is we come to the marriage ceremony, right? The sort of things that we vow when we're 21, 25, 28 years old are things that we may not be fully capable of understanding the magnitude of, right? To love and to cherish this day forth through sickness or health, riches or poverty, till death do us part. These are big asks. And for those of us in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, we understand how much bigger it is now, these asks, than when we first said them. When we first said them, we thought love was this sort of infatuation thing. We saw this beautiful person walking down the aisle or waiting for us at the aisle and said, whew, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with that lovely, gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful person. And then the honeymoon ends, and you realize they don't live exactly like you live. They have different principles and different family norms, and learning how to love that person who is different than you becomes very difficult. We know through marriage, so many other ways, but marriage really becomes a metaphor for the relationship between God and God's people. And that we see when we look at good marriages around us, and we can identify marriages that are filled with love and patience and kindness and goodness for and with one another, we begin to see playing out God's love story for humanity. We get married in the church primarily to show the world what God's covenantal love looks like. This is why we get married in the church. This is why pastors do it, is because it's supposed to be a testimony to the world about what love can look like. And love, it turns out, is really the essence of who God is. It's the essence of God's project with and through humanity. We learn from the very beginning in the story of Adam and Eve that God so loved his creation that he wanted to dwell with it and be in relationship with it. He would come and walk in the garden with Adam and Eve. And finally, it was sin that undid this very close relationship between God and humanity. And God's love is such that he didn't pick up his ball and go home. He's been working to rectify the problem of sin since it first occurred. This break in relationship between creation and creator has been God's special project since his creation. God yearns to be in relationship with you. You. because he loves you so very much. And we know by looking at our relationships in life that love doesn't always mean being proud of each other. It doesn't always mean believing the other person is in the right. It doesn't mean that God thinks that the way you are is exactly the way he called or designed you to be. But it does not diminish God's love for you. God's love keeps coming at you and will not give up. There is no divorce certificate between God and his creation. Isn't that good news? The story today that we're going to read, the series we're talking about now is Becoming, as you can see. And I really wanted to capture after Easter the idea of who we are as Christian people. And I think the public narrative, like if you were to read the New York Times or watch the news or whatever, the public narrative is that Christians are a people who have a long list of things they do not do. You know, that's maybe not untrue, but I would really like to capture a better vision for Christianity than that and talk about what it is we're becoming in Christ. What kind of virtue it is that God is creating out of his church that then becomes a gift of love to the world. I want to talk about what kind of people we can be inside of Christ. And I don't want to just make it a, hey, now you've got to stop doing this, start doing this. I really want to say God is making a virtuous, glorious, beautiful people by his redemptive work of love on the cross and his power over death in the grave. And so let's talk about that. Today we're going to read the story of Nicodemus and Jesus in John chapter 3. It contains within it perhaps the most famous Bible verse of all. If you watch a football game, you'll always see someone holding up a sign that says John 3:16, right? It's a famous verse, and we'll get there, but let's put it into context for just a moment if we could. We're going to read 21 verses in John chapter 3, and I'd invite you, the first 21, John 3, 1 to 21, and I invite you to join me to stand as we read the word of the Lord this morning. Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the miraculous signs you are doing if God were not with him." In reply, Jesus declared, "I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again." "How can a man be born when he is old?" Nicodemus asked. "Surely he cannot enter a second time into his mother's womb to be born." Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless he is born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised by my saying you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born in the Spirit." "How can this be?" Nicodemus asked. "You are Israel's teacher," said Jesus, "and you do not understand these things? I tell you the truth. We speak of what we know, and we testify to what we have seen, but still you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what he has done has been done through God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. This text is just an incredible text in terms of things happening in it. Double meanings, Greek words that mean things that the English words don't mean. It is a fascinating piece of literature. But let me just point out a couple things that we may miss in our English translation that's not the English's fault, it's just the English is not the original language it is written in. First of all, it's very important that Jesus ends by kind of taking a shot at Nicodemus. He says, men who want to hide the evil of their spirit come in darkness. Those who have God doing work in their life, bearing fruit, live in the light because they want to see. Well, the story starts in 3:1 and 2 with Nicodemus coming to Jesus under the cloud of night. He doesn't want to be seen in the day talking to Jesus. And so when Jesus is saying people come under darkness and kind of hide themselves in darkness, he's pointing right at Nicodemus. You're coming to me asking me questions under the cover of darkness because you don't want to see the deeds of your life to be seen. He's calling Nicodemus out. And Nicodemus is no small fry in Jerusalem, a member of the Jewish ruling council. He's someone who understands that Jesus is a rabbi and knows that the miracles he's performing is something that proves that God is within him. But Nicodemus is unwilling to believe what he sees with his own eyes. He's unwilling to testify to this in the light where everyone can see. He needs a secret meeting shrouded in darkness at night, because he fears for his own reputation in the world. Jesus is calling him and inviting him to come into the light, to testify with his life that he believes what he says is true under the cloud of darkness. But Jesus always challenges Nicodemus even leading up to that moment. So he says, I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. Now that word born again, that's a popular word or term in evangelical circles, America 2019. You should be born again. You should be born again. And rightfully so. This is a good and helpful idea. But in the original Greek, the word there means two things, but it means two things at the exact same time. It means born again, the way that it's translated for us. You must be born again. But it also means you must be born from above. Now, it means those two things at the exact same time. And the way you can see that this is true as you read through the text is that Nicodemus responds to only the born again part, all right? So the part that we talk about that we know in our English translation, Nicodemus hears it and says, that is ridiculous. Do you see me? I'm like 5'8", 170 pounds. I'm not crawling back in my mom's womb, okay, Jesus? What do you mean you have to be born again? That's insane. And Jesus answers, yeah, see, you just don't get it. And then he begins to talk about spiritual things, about that which is from above. And so Nicodemus is talking on one plane, which is a reasonable translation of what Jesus says, and Jesus is talking on another plane. You must be born from above. You must have a spiritual renewal. You must have a new birth in the work that God is doing in your life. That is being born again, but it's being born again from above. Nicodemus, shrouded in night, sees what God is doing, recognizing that God is at work in Jesus, but he only sees one possibility in what Jesus is saying. He does not give a full understanding of what Jesus is trying to say, that you must be born again, but that birth must come from above. And Jesus seems very frustrated with Nicodemus. Aren't you Israel's teacher? Aren't you Israel's teacher? Shouldn't you know these things? And so he ends up with this metaphor right before he gets into John 3:16. This metaphor, which I think is super powerful, that I think it's really good for us to stop and receive the power of this metaphor before we jump into John 3:16. He says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man will be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. Just as Moses lifted the snake in the desert? Well, that's an obscure story. It's found in Numbers chapter 21. I know most of you probably in your daily devotions this week were reading right through the book of Numbers, right? Numbers chapter 21 has this story. Moses is leading the people of God through the wilderness. They've been out there for a long time. God is providing them manna by day, and the Israelites are frustrated. They've been wandering and they've been counting on this just flaky food from God, and they can't store and they can't build a house, and they're getting frustrated. And so they start cursing against God and cursing against Moses. They're frustrated. You can understand their frustration, right? And so they start grumbling and complaining, and God, as God does, gets frustrated with them. And so he sends a pack of venomous snakes into the Israel camp. And the Israelites who are grumbling and cursing God start getting bit by these venomous snakes. And they're all falling down. And now that their body is pulsating with venom, their cry out to God turns from anger to, "Help! Help us, we're dying." And so they say, "Moses, pray to God that he would save us." And so Moses goes to God and says, "What am I going to do? Now all of your people are dying of snake bites in the wilderness." And God says to Moses, "Build a bronze snake, put it on a pole, and hold it up in the air in the middle of camp. And anyone who has been bit by venom, who looks upon that snake, will be healed." And sure enough, Moses makes a bronze snake, holds it up in the middle. People look upon the snake, and they are healed from their snake bite in the wilderness. Jesus compares himself to that. This is early in the Gospel of John. Most people don't have any idea that the Messiah would come to die at this point. And he says to Nicodemus, just like Moses' snake in the wilderness, the Son of Man will be lifted up. And he's pointing to the cross, that one day Jesus' love for those infected by sin around him, his love for them will be so incredible that he himself will become the bronzed snake, lifted up for the world, and anyone who will look upon him will be healed from their sin and their calamity. What a powerful idea of salvation that is. That the cross is about Jesus becoming a healing balm for a people who are headed straight towards death. That sin has infected them so deeply that their life and their direction can change just by looking upon Jesus dying on the cross for them and believing and owning that it's for them. But Jesus doesn't end with this metaphor. He carries on into these powerful words that we know. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. The love of God is such that he looks upon the way this world works. It's not good. He looks upon it. He sees the sin of this world. He sees the brokenness of people. He sees the awful things we do to one another and the awful things we do to ourselves. And if any one of us were God, we would probably smite all of this. Just put an end to it and see if we can't get it right again. But God looks upon the worst of this world, and that which bubbles out of him is love. Is love. That he would then empty himself and send the Son into the world so that he could live and die and become like the snake in the desert, that we could be healed from the consequences of sin that leads to death. What a powerful story of this God. The very essence of this God is love. God loves you. You are not excluded from John 3:16. It's not that God loves everyone else. God loves you. The actual word there, more than world, is cosmos. The whole creation, everything God has ever created, God looks upon with love and is willing to send his Son so that we would not perish, but would have eternal life. This is amazing to me. What an incredible story of the gospel that is. Especially since we know if we were to testify before God what we think of this world, love would often not be what we came up with. The world, its systems, its processes, the way we live, if we were to be honest, seems incredibly broken. Our particular situation here in the United States of America is wild right now. I read an article this week that was done in a university study that determined that people in the United States of America were among the most stressed in the entire world. Anxiety and depression are through the roof, and it's characterizing our lives, our interactions with one another, and also our private times as well. We are feeling the weight of our sin bearing out in very public ways at this point in life. Sin is a fascinating word that I want to talk just briefly about. The Greek word for sin is hamartia, and what it literally means is missing the mark. So if we weren't talking in theological terms, you might say if you were going to play with a bow and arrow and you were going to shoot archery, and you aimed at the bullseye and you did not hit the board, you hamartia'd. The mark was the board and you missed it. And so sin is missing the mark of God's call on our life, God's intention, God's plan for our life. When we miss the mark of what God calls us to do, we have sinned. And so I believe that all of this anxiety and depression, a lot of it, is very reasonable. I'm not knocking it. But as we see that rise, as we see stress rise, as we see negativity rise, as we see broken families increase, all these things that we're seeing around us happen, I believe that this is the consequence of sin in our life, that we are missing the mark in God's call for our life. And the antidote of God is not to make you feel more guilty, to pour on more anxiety, to pour on more depression, to make you feel bad. The antidote that God has for you is to raise his son up in the middle of camp and say, look upon him. He will heal you. He will bring you new life. He will take the struggle that you are in and he will repurpose your life, redirect your life, change your trajectory and your story, and you will find that there is peace and eternal life in that. And this is all because God loves you so. God has gone to incredible lengths to demonstrate to you, not with shame, not with guilt, but with love of how he sees you. I remember when Claire was about to be born. Claire is my second daughter. She's 8 years old now. I remember when Sharice was starting to get very pregnant with her, I started having a particular anxiety in my life. That anxiety was not, how are we going to take care of 2 kids? Nothing like that. That anxiety was, I would look upon Mackenzie, my oldest daughter, the daughter that we had had for 2.5 years now, that we had been used to raising. I would look upon her and I would think, I love this child so much. How am I going to fit more love into my life? How am I going to do it? I had such incredible anxiety of how in the world I was going to love this second child as much as I loved this first child. I was tapped out of love. And so then Claire was born, and I held her for the first time. And I had incredibly new feelings. And I realized it wasn't that I was tapped out of love, but that my capacity for love grew. It got bigger. And so they ask me every once in a while, not as often as my sister and I ask my parents, but which one of us do you love more, right? This is a typical child question, right? And the answer, of course, is neither of you. We love you both the same but different, and that's good news. And that's the sort of love that God has for this world. That with each and every one of our lives, each and every one of our stories, each and every one of our shortcomings and our failures and our mistakes, God's love continues to expand for you. And no matter how much you feel marked by your past or your mistake or your sin, God's love increases where your sin increases because God's heart breaks for you to find wholeness and completeness in your life. God's heart breaks to bring you back into the fold, to put you on the trajectory of healing and eternal life that he yearns for you to be on. So if there's anything that I want you to get out of this service today, it's this: you are loved. You are loved. Absolutely, unconditionally, as the very essence and plan of God, you are beloved. St. Augustine said this: our hearts are restless until they find their home, in God. Our hearts are restless until they find their home in God. And we find as a virtue of the Christian faith that when we find our home in the heart of God, is that we begin to give up the things that we used to think were important, and God can fill those spaces with his love. And so we have this double process that's happening in our life where we open up our heart to be filled with the love of God, and then it flows out of us to the world as a testimony for the love of God. It makes its way, this unconditional love, into our marriages. It makes its way into our parenting. It makes its way onto our streets and our neighborhoods, into our churches. And we become the essence of God's love to the world. What happens is God breaks the mold of sin in our life, but he doesn't leave us empty. He fills us with his love, and we become a walking testimony of how passionate God's love is and how much God yearns to see reconciliation in this world. Charles Wesley wrote a hymn called "And Can It Be?" And looking to the Philippians 2 chapter, if you ever want to read that, it's great stuff. He says in this hymn, Jesus emptied himself of all but love. What an incredible image that is, that Jesus would empty himself of all but love and then invite us to do the exact same thing. If you were to read the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians, the very first one is love. That when we begin to bear the fruit of the Spirit, we become love. Why is this? How is this? It's because God so loved us. And it's his love that wins us over. And what wins us over often becomes what it is that we become. And so we're offered this incredible opportunity every day of our life, but today especially, to join the people of Israel and look upon that which is given to us in the deserts of life. So often we feel parched and distant and alone and struggling. The desert metaphor really works for how our lives work. And Jesus says he's just like the snake that Moses had. He'll lift his body up on the cross and bleed and die, so that if you look upon it and believe that this is the Son of God, you will be healed. So today, in our world today, there are so many philosophical arguments, so many Nicodemuses that want to come and have an argument about theology, philosophy, that want to argue Jesus and God down, and that's a real part of life. Most of you will hear it in your workplace or on your street or on the news or in the newspaper. There's so many people that want to have a philosophical argument, and not all of us are up for a philosophical argument, and many of us feel overwhelmed by having to get into intellectual discussions like the one that Nicodemus wants to have. So I invite you today not to get involved in the arguments, not to believe you have to have all of your theology in a row. But I invite you to look upon the cross today, which we brought back in here today with the white banner representing the resurrection. Look upon the cross as we close out today. Gaze upon it. Salvation is to be found there. The Son of God raised himself up that we could look upon it and be healed and find hope and find restoration. When we look upon the cross, we should see love. Love for you in particular, not for your neighbor, not for someone who did less bad things, for you. The love of God is on full display on the cross. And the story of Nicodemus ends in a fascinating way. We don't hear about him again, not again, until the scene of the cross. And Nicodemus, the one who's invited to see Jesus as the salvation that Moses had in the desert, shows up at the cross. Jesus dies. He's pronounced dead. And in the Gospel of John, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are the two who reach up on the cross and care for the body of Jesus. Nicodemus may not have got it when he broke into philosophical arguments and wanted to have theology breakdowns. But when he saw Jesus hanging on the cross, he believed because he recognized the love of God was for him. And so it is for you as well. As we end today, we've been going to our No Longer Lost banner, as you know, and we've been signing our name. If today is your day that you want to say, you know what, I may not have it all together, my past may not be right, I may not understand what I'm getting into, but I look upon the story of Jesus and I see love, and I could use some love and wholeness in my life right now. I invite you to come forward. Come down and pray at the altar. Come grab a pastor. We'll be waiting down here in the front row, and we will work with you what to do with the stirring that God has in your heart today. But if you're ready to open your heart to the love of God today, make it happen. Do not sit still while we sing this final song. Make a move, a first step, and we'll help you with the next steps. Would you join me in standing as we sing today?